Your brain is constantly making new connections. Every new place you go, every person you meet, every store that you go to, every new food that you try is making a new neural connection. The more you encounter something, the more solidified your neural connections are and the more connections that your brain makes. So when you are very little and you are learning everything about the world, your brain is in its basically prime state of forming neural connections. But that process doesn't ever stop. So as you get older, your family forms your neural connections, your education forms your neural connections, any religious experience that you're put into forms neural connections. And your neural connections or your neural pathways are what dictate how you perceive your reality, how you perceive the world around you, how you interact with people, in your personality even. When you submit yourself to an authority, whether it's your parents, your teachers, a religious organization, into which you trust them to teach you the truth, and you allow that to define truth in your mind, you are forming neural connections to perceive reality through those perspectives and those lenses. So we got to be really careful about who we are trusting our neural pathways to as far as when it comes to what is truth, what is fact. It's a bit of an extreme way of looking at it, but any form of education or formal education, whether it's religious education or even public education from childhood or going to college, paying for an education, this is a form of brainwashing. You're conditioning the brain to perceive reality in very specific pathways and constructs. So when we understand that our reality is basically just energy, think of it as code, and our brains, our neural connections, are what interpret that code. So our eyes perceive the visible light spectrum, the code of that frequency. Our ears perceive the auditory spectrum. And when we observe the data, we're not actually physically seeing with our eyes or hearing with our ears. It's taking in data and transferring that to our pre-structured neural pathways, and it formulates how we perceive reality, which is why we have billions of people over the world that can see and experience the same event and perceive it completely differently. Two people can be walking down the street in the same blue sky and beautiful day, and one person feels miserable and everything is miserable and the world is broken and sad, whereas the other person is happy and joyful and perceives all the good in the world. The reality is that you are unable to perceive inaccuracy, things, or data that your brain is not hardwired to perceive. Both a college education or like secondary education and religious constructs are really good examples of this. Somebody who has had their neural pathways conditioned by a specific institution, by a specific way of thinking, will perceive reality through that lens. Somebody who grew up in a religious organization, no matter which one it is, will perceive their reality through that lens. And it's actually extraordinarily difficult for most people, not for everyone, for most people to be presented with a viewpoint or some sort of fact or evidence that is outside of their pre-structured neural pathways. Like, you can present factual evidence and truth to somebody, but if their neural pathways are not structured in a way to be able to comprehend or to see what you're showing them, it will seem like nonsense to them. I'm going to give you another example. You notice how when you buy a new car, you suddenly start seeing that car everywhere. It's not that there are more of your car suddenly on the road. It's you've now made a neural connection to recognize the same vehicle you have, and your brain is now picking up on it. They exist now in your reality, whereas before it wasn't even in your reality because you didn't have the neural pathways to perceive it. So much argument and debate about politics and like left and right and different religions and conspiracy theories and whatever else, any sort of information or belief system that divides people. What a lot of people don't realize, like they think, oh, if I just present the truth, if I just show the facts, if I just show the evidence that I've come up with myself, that they'll be able to see, they'll be able to understand. But that's not how it works. Because unless they choose to look outside of their current neural pathways, which is actually an extraordinarily uncomfortable thing to do, unless somebody is willing to look outside of their reality and consider that there's a reality outside of what they're able to perceive and understand, they're not going to be able to look at even factual, provable data and consider it as truth. It's easier for them to just dismiss it entirely or condemn it or label you as crazy or whatever else it is. You're not just fighting, some data against other data in debates. You're literally working against pre-structured and solidified neural pathways that control how much people are even able to physically perceive and comprehend. And this brings me all the way back to, it is really, really important to limit. And this is, a lot of people will say that I just don't submit and I have a problem with authority, and maybe that's true, but it's really careful to limit the number of sources and to understand who you are allowing to be an authority for truth in your life. And to understand that the way you were raised in your family and your religion and your education all affects the amount of truth that you're able to perceive. And there is stuff out there that is beyond your neural pathways perception. And unless you get to the point where you're able to be comfortable with the breaking feeling, the stripping of your own understanding to allow your brain to be renewed, you will be forever limited in what you're able to perceive. There's a whole lot to this. Like, I could go on and on and on, but I feel like this has been long enough. I hope it makes sense. Shalom, and I love you all.